In the beginning, there was audit, and it was good. Audit was not good. I'm just kidding. No one likes audit. Audit, what I'm talking about is this process where business looks at their most important applications. They dump all the permissions into spreadsheets. They hand the spreadsheets out to management team. Management team looks at it and makes choices. Should we keep or remove this access? Weeks, sometimes months later, those spreadsheets make it back to an IT person who makes changes to the access in the back-end system. And then somebody, some poor, unfortunate soul, has to take screenshots that all of this actually happened to prove to auditors that the business process works, right? Does anybody here work with or for a company that does this type of business audit process? Does anyone like it? Keep your hands up. Good for you. I was going to have you keep your hand up forever as punishment if you like that process, because no one likes it. We do audit like this because the business needs to prove to an outside entity usually that they're following a standard process that's dictated by standards, by regulations, to make sure that the company is secure and their access has been cared for. This is super important, but this is a huge problem because it's really inefficient, it's ineffective, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of time. To help improve this process, there's identity governance. That's what we're here to talk about today. Identity governance and administration is a NetIQ OpenText product that collects permissions and account data centrally into a central repository. It ties the accounts that it collects back to individual identities. I like to think of identities as belly buttons. Everybody gets one and only one identity in the identity governance system. So you tie these accounts back to an individual. This lets the business then review this set of permissions and accounts that we've collected. We just turn around and show this data right back to the business. Lets them do it quickly with a standardized type of review format, no more spreadsheets. Today, we're going to tell you the true story of a company that faced this challenge and overcame it with great success. This is BAE Systems is who we're talking about. BAE is a quite large US defense contractor. BAE had a number of challenges that they were facing. Number one, they had to do reviews, right? They already were doing business and financial reviews on a regular basis. As a requirement of working with the DoD, they're required to follow what we call CMMC requirements. This is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification process. So they had an extra set of regulations that they had to conform to. And what's worse is CMMC has been going through some changes lately, right? There was a version 1 a couple years ago. More recently, there's version 2, so the requirements and regulations are changing. On top of that, BAE had switched one of their giant external audit group. They were using one of the big 5 companies. They switched to a different big 5 company. All these things all came together at the same time, which made new people were involved in the process. They had new challenges, new perspectives, new findings were coming out, and they realized, wait, there's a way that we can solve this. We need to set up a governance program. Let's go purchase a tool that's going to help with that. It's not going to do everything, but it's going to do quite a bit. So today you're going to hear about the process and what we've done. A few years ago, last year actually, I was at a conference not unlike this one. I talked to as many people as I could, and I asked, do you have a governance program? And if so, how long has it been going on? And how many applications have you onboarded? Overwhelmingly, like literally 99% of the people that I talked to, their program had already been going on for 3 to 5 years, give or take, and they had onboarded roughly 1 to 2 dozen applications, right? This is very normal in the governance universe, is you have a long-standing program, and you're able to onboard just the few most important applications in your environment. One of the number one most important things you can do with governance is you want to ensure that you have coverage over your entire enterprise. 1 to 2 dozen apps doesn't cover it, folks. We have to do better. So today, I'm going to tell you about the story. This is a 3-year story, just under. In December 2020, we started a pilot of IGA. We got it set up really quick. We connected to a couple applications. We had a review working very quickly. We showed it to the business, and they're like, yes, this is exactly what we need. So in March, it became a formal project. In December, 1 year later, we already had 200 applications onboarded. and reviewed within 1 year. The next year, we continued doing onboarding. We improved how we reported back to the business. We did a lot of training. We educated the business about how their own processes should be working. We handed off responsibility to application owners. And just this last August, we've now completed onboarding of over 3,000 applications into IG. This is huge. And so now that I've impressed you, I can tell you my name is Jim Montgomery. I work for a company called Trivir. I am the governance practice lead at Trivir. I've spent the last half decade trying to figure out how to do these things as efficiently and effectively as possible. Trivir is a boutique consulting company. We focus in identity and access management and governance, and BAE is one of our clients. We did all these things with the NetIQ Identity Governance and Administration product. Thinking about compliance, compliance is not easy. Compliance is hard. I like to tell folks that it's not a software problem anymore. It is a business problem. We have the software, we have the technology to be able to overcome this problem. It's business and it's process, and it's getting lots of folks all pointed in the same direction. IT, or the team that's implementing identity governance, can't do it all by themselves. You have to spread out the problem. One of the strategies we've used is making application owners responsible for their own audit. We needed to enable the team. We couldn't have one small team enabling the whole business or doing the work for the whole business. We had to enable application owners and give them the resources and the information so that they could do it themselves. So, how can organizations improve compliance? If IT can't do it alone, how do you enable the business? And this is where I'm going to introduce Tracy Lamantia. Tracy is the Director of Identity Services at BAE. Tracy has purview over Active Directory, single sign-on, privileged access management, identity governance, and a host of other things. Tracy is a team builder. She's a leader. She is a planner. She's a visionary. Tracy Lamantia, help me welcome her.
Thanks, Jim. So, thank you for having us today. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you'll have some tidbits that you can take back to your world and try and further the cause of identity governance. So identity governance is just one piece of what I'm calling identity fabric. Right? There's an orchestration, there's a lot of different moving parts, and I'll talk a little bit about what I mean identity fabric over the course of this discussion. You have lifecycle identity management, you have SSO, MFA, PAM, there's a host of things. And what we're trying to do here is provide our services to the customer. And so, we're reviewing and improving our processes. We're trying to make their lives a little bit easier. The work of doing auditing, if you haven't done it before, can be quite overwhelming for people, especially your admins, your system owners, even our business partners. And so we wanted to figure out ways to go about to improve these processes to try and make them as frictionless as possible. Before, like Jim was saying, you had spreadsheets, you were tracking down information, you were, looking at all different places. Information process was disparate. Even if you were lucky enough to have somebody that had an access review process already in place, 9 times out of 10 it was manual and spreadsheets, and you were tracking down and you were trying to do the best you can. Even your evidence, you were doing screenshots, you were doing emails, you were going through your inbox, everything, right? But what we come away with is now we have this centralized solution that is enterprise level, it's centralized processes, it's centralized data, and it's scalable. And that's really important for us as people that are in part of IT operations, if you're in that area, or even in the CISO world. You're trying to make things as efficient as possible and offload some of the manual pieces of it. So we have all this stuff, and what it does is, and I think this is a very big value point, is it shows consistency, it shows that we know what we're doing, right? So when the auditors come in, they're ready to stump you. And they're ready to think about, okay, well, what about that? Where can you get me that? Well, just give me 2 minutes. I'm going to hit a button, and here's the evidence. And that's kind of the goal that we're trying to get at, because we want to be able to build that confidence with our auditors that we know what we're doing and that we have consistent processes. And let's not forget, it's all about security and making sure we have the controls in place. So building that confidence and giving that information through our support and services.
Oh, that's me.
Thanks. So one of the concepts that when I came in a little over a year ago, or a year into the program, our teams were working very hard, very fast. I was just telling some folks, not only were we trying to build and put into a new tool into place, but we were also transitioning from a waterfall environment to an agile environment. So all of these things, people were like working hard, they were overcoming challenges, they were doing all these things, but it felt like we were checking off a list. And so one of the things that I spent some time on is like, I want people to understand that this isn't just a tool that we need to implement. This is a solution. This is a service that we're going to be providing. And so I came away with a couple business goals. Again, even though I'm in technology, I'm thinking business-like, and our approach. And so these are the things that we really said that we were going to focus on in everything that we did as we related to this project. Compliance was first and foremost. Right? I think that goes without explanation. But operational efficiency, not just automating processes, but actually making them work faster for us. And then the customer experience. And I think that this is something that is often missed, and it's really important. They have to be our business partners. And then through this, we want to make sure that we have them in mind. Yes, we're transitioning. In some cases, people had never done audits before. They had never been through that process. And all of a sudden, we're asking them to do certifications and review access and all of this stuff. So, we wanted to educate them. We wanted to make sure that their experience was as frictionless as possible. And then our approach, automation wherever possible. We don't want to gold plate things, right? There's a term where, you do so much work, but we wanted to automate where it made sense and where we got the most bang for our buck. Compliance, again, we were actually, as Jim had mentioned, we started this project as part of an audit type for your financials and software system audits. And what was coming in was that we were dealing with CMMC as well. And we wanted to be an early adopter under the CMMC certification process. As a DoD contractor, that was very important to us. Basically, the government says this: if you don't get certified, you can't do business with us. So that was a huge, burning bridge moment for us. But what was interesting is that we had auditors from one type and then auditors from another type, and they weren't working together. They were very different people, they were very different objectives, et cetera. So our approach was to get them together and talked, and they work it out. Because all of a sudden, you're pulling yourself out in the middle of the problem. They're telling you this works, but this one's saying, no, that doesn't work. You got to do something else. I was like, I can't do that. You can't feed two masters, right? You can only, so you get them aligned and you get them working together. So that was key to us. And then obviously, working at the enterprise, making sure that we had a scalable solution and that standards, as I mentioned, some people were already doing attestations. And so we wanted to look at what they were doing and say, okay, got it, but guess what? We need to do these additional things for these reasons. So we wanted to, we really looked hard at the enterprise processes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then convenience, right? And that goes in line with the customer experience. Wherever possible, trying to make it as convenient for them to do their job as efficiently and effectively as possible. So this is the program team that we worked with. And as I mentioned, we went from waterfall to agile during the start of this program. The customer center, and when I call the customer, I mean our business partners, because I don't know how many people have this scenario. I imagine most of us. You have an IT lead and you have a business lead for any software application that you're supporting. So we made sure that they were both involved. Then we have, and you can see on the sides on opposite ends, they really weren't opposite, but it's just the way this is the picture laid out. Auditors and compliance, again, bridging that part partnership together, making sure that they both had a voice, and then if there was any conflicts, that they worked it out and resolved it so that we could deliver what we needed to. We had our IG team, we had an integration team. So Jim's gonna tell you a lot about how this really made us successful. We used an enterprise bus, an integration bus, to gather all these disparate pieces of information, bring it together, standard normalize it, and then put it into the IG tool so that we could run our data a little bit more efficiently in our processing. And then, like I said, making sure our process engineers, our communications, our training, all of that, change management was a big part of this because the majority of the people didn't know what this meant to them and how it would impact their jobs and why they had to do it. Around all of that is having a champion, and that's really important. And I'm not talking about an executive champion who funds you. I'm talking about a person that's somewhere in the middle that can really speak to and translate the pieces, right? You got your technical stuff, you've got your business stuff. What have you done for me lately? Well, let me tell you how this helps you, right? That is critical, is having that champion. So just briefly, I'm just going to go show what the last 3 years look like. A lot of it was, what I call setting up the foundation in 2021, infrastructure, key initial connections, and Jim's going to tell you some great things about why that really worked for us and which key initial connections we made. Oh, that was a mouthful. And we did our first review campaign. We learned a ton from it. We pushed a lot of data in, we did a full review campaign. And what I mean by a review campaign is the start and finish of a particular engagement. In 2022, what we learned from that is, again, I mentioned it earlier, is it wasn't just a tool. It needed a lot more. It needed to be a solution. So we spent a lot of time with our auditors, our compliance people. We worked on process improvements. What tools do we need to do to make our business partners successful? As Jim mentioned, we put some ownership back into the operations side of things, training, and we continued to onboard. And I'm happy to say, all these tools that we started working on, that at the end of 2022, we had really kind of formalized what we considered a future solution service. This year has been about operationalization. I knew I was going to do that. And figuring out how, we got our customers onboarded, we understood what their needs were, they understood what they had to do, but we needed to figure out how to make ourselves internally more efficient. And so we've been spending a lot of time about that, doing, re-indexing or looking at opportunities to process things a lot more quickly. What we can do to, do some of the more specific features that BAE requires. Training, and then obviously we did a lot more rollout, and I'm happy to tell you that by the end of, actually, a month ago, we now have over 3,000 systems under governance, and we've conducted reviews for all of them. So we've also changed the cycles. In the beginning, when it was manual, there was a lot of quarterly reviews. And so we went through a full year. We implemented this, the first one in December 21. By the middle of 2022, the business partner came back to us and said, you know what, I'm good. We can do it annually now. So again, some business process efficiencies and learning. So what I'm going to talk about right here is this is all like a journey. And I talked about identity fabric and the orchestration. So what I'm working on with my teams is I'm looking at how do I integrate all of these? How do I orchestrate them in such a way that I'm not overloading our business partners with all this stuff? And when I was looking for different ways to demonstrate this, this is actually an OpenText maturity model. And if you've been through their process, I'm sure you've seen this slide before. But it really resonated with me because we already have things in the assumed trust area. We have our access management, single sign-on, yada, yada, yada. And we've actually got a lot in the zero trust world, and we are definitely a least privileged type of organization. So we really want to get to that zero trust maturity model as quickly and as efficiently as we can. And then you can see where identity governance is right solid in there, in the middle of that. I'd say we're about 50% there, and I'm really looking forward to what we can do on the farther end of the right, what they call adaptive intelligence. And that's where I think I'm going to have a lot of my biggest bang for my buck and my biggest value to the organization. Because once I can get this information in there and I can look at the data, I can start developing and analyzing patterns. And I can sit there and I can make this something of a reactive administrative task to something that's going to be more proactive and strategic. And so, when we get to this point where you're using machine learning, we're taking adaptive behavioral analytics, et cetera, then we can take this data and we can turn it into something that can make the business more efficient, tie it directly into the business objectives that they have. So that's kind of where the high-level vision is going to be for me, is to get to that ability to be more strategic and more proactive. So we had literally hundreds of applications, thousands. I talked to you about the back-end systems. 3,000 back-end systems, databases, servers, AD domains, AD groups, PAM safes, all of that. We still have 1,700 front-end applications to go through. So a little bit what we're going to talk about next is, I'm going to give you a little bit more of an insight to what our thinking was to get through the first 3,000, and then talk about how we're going to change our model a little bit to move forward with the other 1,700 front-end applications. Our main thinking and our main philosophy during that first 3,000 was leveraging economies of scale. That's the easiest way to think about it. Similar systems with their similar system architecture, how can we get as much efficiency out as possible? So we literally had a steep climb up, and we were able to do that. And I called it my economies of scale. Now I'm looking more about the diminishing return side of things, but we're trying to leverage all of this information so that we can build these patterns, and hopefully those applications will come along a lot more quickly as well. I think that's enough for that one. So now, in order to go faster, what are some of the key learnings? Making sure that we had the appropriate level of resources on the applications solutions team side, and that we had their buy-in. They understood what we're trying to do and how we were going to go about it. And they actually supported us, because the application solutions team is the people that have the integration bus team. So it worked out very nicely for us. When we started doing all of this and we bringing all that data through the integration bus, one of the huge understandings, and until you had the ability to look at this data, is that we had millions of rows of permissions. We never realized that. We said, okay, here's a big database, there's 15 accounts on it, and there's just under 1 million for one database of permissions. We're like, whoa. And there was another presentation that they talked about the proliferation of information and data. That's a prime example of it. We're like, how does somebody need 1 million permissions in an application? It befuddled us. And quite honestly, it brought the business partner in, and they're like, why do we have all that? So again, turning it around to not being just an audit per thing, but also to provide additional information services to make them more efficient as well. And then the other thing that we realized too through this, and it's very important that you think about, is our completeness and what we call completeness and accuracy check. And that's a kind of a term that our compliance person put together, because as you're starting to pull this data in, you've got orphans, you've got duplicates, you've got all this other stuff, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we were going through some iterations of cleaning up the data. So we've done that, and we do a very good job of it. In the future, what I'm hoping to do is it gets cleaned up before it even comes to the IG tool, and that we're looking at it proactively. So, but that's a real important thing that needs to happen, because once you put it through the tool and the system, you want to be smart about how efficient that review campaign is. And if you don't do those kinds of things first, you're gonna end up doing a lot of stop-starts. Okay, so this is Jim's analogy, and I really like it, and I think it's funny. He said, a baleen whale can eat over 15 tons of food. So if we tie back to my 1 million permissions, that's just the volume of data that we're dealing with. And so it's a very time-consuming process. And that, when we were onboarding applications, that's where we spent 80% of our time, is doing data ingestion, data cleansing, data integrity. And even though we were bulk loading, there was still a lot of work to do. Our CMDB was immature. We had just changed our ITSM a few years before, so they were still building that tool. Luckily enough, we're there now. Because they had a lot of accounts and they were disparate, et cetera, we found that there was a lot of accounts that we didn't know who owned them. In many cases, they used distribution lists as their account owners. Does anybody have that? No? You're lucky. We did. And so we had to literally manually track down people to say, okay, who's this? Well, it's a distribution list. No, that doesn't work. We need a body. And Jim will talk a little bit more about that. But even the handling of standard administration accounts was all over the place. In the same group, they had the same manager, they had the same structure, they might be 4 different databases, but they were handling how they managed their accounts within that database very differently. So, our advice here is look at data as much as you can, as proactively as you can. Make sure that you're working with your stakeholders hand in hand because you need them in this process. And then another key learning was if you are part of CMC, or I don't think it came up much through any of the financial software audits, but definitely with CMMC, if your non-production data is not masked, you still have to review it. And that's a big, big challenge for people because you assume that it's non-production data, so you can just mess with it and do whatever you want with it, right? Which creates a whole bunch of stuff that you have to clean up and get organized and make sure. So that's a big, big learning for us. And it created some extra work, quite honestly, because we were looking at the production area and said, oh yeah, this will be easy. We can do non-production. And then we got it and we went, oh my Lord. So this is the impact of all of those changes. So, okay, next. So, how fast can you onboard is a key question. You sit there and you're hearing all this information. We did all these things. How fast can we onboard? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the management felt that, we get a few of these applications in and it'll get faster and faster and faster. And that's where my concept of economies of scale came into place. But if you're smart about how you use the data, work with it, et cetera, the solutions will get faster. You'll find patterns, you'll find opportunities. If you have multiple instances of a particular application like Hyperion or Concur or whatever, you're going to be able to leverage those patterns. We found that there's 6 integration types, I think, and we're working with 4 and hope we never get to the 2. So you'll be able to leverage some of that, definitely, but you need to look at your data, understand and understand the technology you're working with. So I'm going to pass this over to Jim, and he's going to tell you a little bit more on the technology side.
Thanks, Tracy. When I was a boy,
Sorry.
Are you saying that wasn't ever a time? No, I promise you, I was a child once. My mother would ask me to do chores around the house, right? Jim, can you clean up the living room? Yeah, Mom, I'll do that. And that made sense. That was a fair ask from Mom because it was mostly my stuff in the living room anyway, or my brother's. And I remember as I was trying to clean up the living room with my stuff in it, I would try and think about how can I most efficiently get this done so I can go back to goofing off, right? I'd rather be playing Legos or with my Transformers or something. And so I'd think about, like, wait, if I grab both of these things, they go on the same shelf, and I only have to make one trip, right? And if I grab these things, they go in the same bin. So I wanted to be efficient for a long time now, it turns out. I still want to be efficient, but this has matured into wanting to be effective. And I think everyone here wants to be effective. And I believe that technology can help us be more effective. And so that's what we tried to do inside of our program, right? We wanted to use the IG software to do lots of things as quick and as effectively as possible. So the first thing that we did, right at the beginning of the program, the IG program, we set up a connection to Active Directory. Lots of applications integrate with AD. As soon as we had that one connection, hey, now we can review any of the applications that leverage Active Directory groups. That was a quick win. Separately, we connected to the Privileged Access Management System. We had one connector, but now we could review any applications who was managing their administrative credentials through this one system. Now we had purview, we could see, we could review that infrastructure. That is a huge way to reduce risk very quickly, is to just set up IG to talk to PAM. We had some existing processes to review all the operating system administrative credentials for both all the Windows side of the house and the Linux side of the house, right? They already had a process that would take administrative information and drop it either to a database or to a flat file. We just ingested that piece of data. It was very quick, and now we were able to review in a standard, formal way that the business had been trained on how to do this. Now we could review all the operating systems inside the environment. This is how we did these things very quickly. This is probably the thing I'm most proud of in our program. This is how we got to the thousands. As Tracy mentioned, there is an enterprise integration platform that was already in place. We asked these guys, hey, and gals, can you create a RESTful interface where we can ask by name for a specific database? And they're like, yeah, sure, we can do that. When we make this request, we'll ask, again, with a single database name. They are going to look at an internal configuration table that has all the connection information for that one database, right? They just look it up. They go over to the PAM system, check out a credential, right? Because credentials are rotating on all these databases, right? They're using a service account to access them. And then they make a call through JDBC, a SQL call to whichever database we wanted to get accounts and permissions from. So very quickly, we were able to collect from hundreds of Oracle instances and literally thousands of SQL Server instances inside the environment with one type of connector. We have lots of these connectors, but it's the same pattern every time. It was very efficient to set up. So Jim, what do you do about non-human accounts, right? We talk a lot about accounts and identities. There's a couple of patterns that you see IG practitioners follow to handle non-human accounts. We're talking about service accounts, administrative accounts, robot, RPA type of things that people aren't interactively logging in with on a regular basis. We followed the pattern on the left. This is where you think about who has responsibility for that account. And you're going to link the account back to the appropriate person. And it could be more than one person potentially, but at least one person is going to have the responsibility, and likely their manager or an app owner is going to review their access that they're getting on behalf of that service account. The other patterns involve either creating a proxy account or a proxy identity, and then you can assign a bunch of service accounts to the proxy, and then you can review that. Also, you could, if you really wanted to, create lots of identities for every single service account. That might seem like it's a little crazy, and in fact it is. Don't do that. You want to use this left pattern. This is the most efficient. These other choices are really just kicking the can down the road of making a business decision about who's responsible for that access. When you are talking to the business and training people on how to perform reviews, it is important when you're thinking about the process that you want to standardize to as few review types as possible, right? If you're going to have to train your workforce to be able to support this new review process and you want one standard to rule everything, you want to use as few review types as possible. And naturally, there are different types of reviews that you use in governance, right? You may need to review that you have all the right managers selected, or you might need to review your permissions from time to time. And then as part of reviews, normally applications, they have this habit of storing permissions and accounts in different ways, and you might need to come up with a review that addresses those singletons, those one-offs. But as best you can, you'll want to prevent one-offs, right? You don't want to give that individual application owner carte blanche and let them create a review just for them, because now you have to train people on how to use that too, and it becomes more expensive. You're creating more friction inside the business. Is anybody here interested in achieving least privilege internally? Least privilege, this is the idea where your users only have the access that they need at the time that they need it. Anybody interested in zero trust or ZTA? Zero trust is really least privilege. It's this idea that you might not even have access until you just need it, and we're going to ask every single time you try and use it to make sure that you get that access. The NIST standard for zero trust clearly lays out identity governance is the one software way that you can achieve zero trust architecture. this platform gets you to zero trust. The other ways you can achieve zero trust are what I'd like to think of as unnatural things that you do to your network, like microsegmentation. So I'm much more interested in a software way to approach it. I think it's a better approach. We did all these things with the identity governance and administration software. Just a reminder. And Tracy's going to tell us a little bit more about some of the other business challenges that we had to face to help accelerate the business.
So I talked a little bit earlier about some people knew what they were doing, some people didn't, some people had their own concepts about what needed to be done. And we realized after we did that first launch, if you will, the first review campaign, that everything was very disparate, right? They also don't have the resources. All of a sudden they're being told that they need to start doing additional audit tasks in their systems. And they're like, well, wait a minute, if I only have 3 people and they're doing development and new development and operations, et cetera, how am I going to fit this in? So what we tried to do, and again, thinking about how we can make it as frictionless for our customers, is we started building them some tools to help self-manage and even be proactive. So the first thing we did was build this guidance document. And we did it in such a way that it lays it out in business terms, why we're doing what we're needing to do and how we're going to go about it. And in fact, we had a couple workshops that really helped us out because we took each one of the access controls that are out there and we mapped them to how it relates to them in their world. And those 2 days were probably some of the best days that we had ever had. We brought everybody in, workshop, and then we started doing this walkthrough and walking through each of these. So that guidance document kind of solidified this process that we did this workshop, and we came away with a document. We also said, well, how do we prioritize our work? And so we created a scoring model that allowed us to look at it based on risk, complexity, number of users, impact to the business, et cetera. And we provided that tool for them so that they could come to us and say, these are the applications we want us to focus on. We held, as I mentioned, we held a workshop to help solidify that understanding and be able to kind of crosswalk them through things. And then we also said, okay, now we have this onboarding. How do we get new people onboarded and new business owners and new systems owners? And we created a playbook for them that helped prepare them for this process so that they weren't coming to us and saying, okay, I'm ready, what do you want to do? So we provided some educational materials to help them with that. One of the other key learnings is that the system owner, who was the person that was responsible for this review campaign, she came and she goes, okay, this is great, but how do I get all this, how do I get all the artifacts? How do I get all the evidence? Because right now I still have all these owners and they're all doing their own thing. So it was a great question, one that we hadn't considered, quite honestly. We said, oh, well, you guys are going to be doing it. She goes, I still have 400 people I have to go track down for any kind of evidence. This is crazy. So we created what we called a repository, an artifact repository. And basically, in a nutshell, it provides them with every review campaign. There's some naming conventions, some structure, et cetera. So if an auditor comes back to us and says, we want to see ABC database and prove to us that you did the right levels, you did a review campaign, and you removed people's access and you have proof of it and evidence, we were able to put that into one place. So that's all she had to do. She hit a button, she was off on her way. And then we also allowed for additional evidence materials, the emails, the spreadsheets, whatever that happened that would have translated that. So that was a big win for us, big value add. And the other thing is like, great, you did all this stuff, but how do I know how we're doing? What do we have? What's going on that, can you tell me on a review campaign how we're progressing? Whose door do I need to go knock on to make sure that they're doing stuff? And so we also built out a series of metrics, and I tell them the progress that they're making during any review campaign, but also we started building KPIs that said how efficient we're becoming, how much less risky we are because we are staying on top of people's access and making sure that they only have the right access for the right time, the right reasons. We've onboarded all these databases, production, test environments. What do we do now? What's the future look like? So I'm going to give you kind of a high level of our roadmap. basically in 2024, we are going to expand. In a nutshell, we're going to add more applications. We're going to continue our automation of deep provisioning. In some cases, we were able to connect directly with that service and deprovision immediately. In other cases, we had to have kind of some steps along the way. So we really want to tighten up that area. We're really looking forward to the 4.2 version of IG because they're going to integrate access requests, and that's going to give us some high level of value. We're going to be working on that. We're also going to be tying in event-based access reviews. So right now it's periodic time-based reviews is what we call them internally. We're going to focus in on those. And then futuristically, one of the things that I mentioned earlier that I think is really important for us is figuring out and creating a strategy around master data management for identity management and identity governance. How can we get that information and look at it proactively and be able to make some strategic decisions? And this, if we can manage to do this, then making role management, birthright access, all of these other things will help us to be more proactive and strategic about what we decide in those areas for 2025. And then, that's a lot of work for the next couple of years. As I mentioned, we have 1,700 applications. I don't think we're going to do all 17,000 or 1,700, but I do know that we're going to be focusing in on that. So 2026 is all about, again, kind of setting the ground, letting the dust settle, and then taking us to our next level of maturity. I mentioned about role mining, birthright, risk scoring, all of those things that we're going to do. And so the question here is how can IG help us with that? And Jim's going to spend a couple minutes talking about some of the strategies that we're going to put in place to make those things happen.
Thanks, Tracy. I have a coworker, a colleague, a dear colleague. In the 80s, she used to work on Cray supercomputers. You guys know Cray supercomputers? These are used to be the most powerful machines on the planet, right? They came with their own little bench, right? You sat down and you worked on the computer. A couple years ago, with the help of Google and conversation with his colleague, we looked up what's a comparative machine these days. And it turns out Cray supercomputer from 1982 had slightly less processing power than an iPad 2. Right? So this means the phone in your hand right now is more powerful than what people were dreaming of for generations, right? We have more processing power than we've ever had on the face of the earth, since ever. Anybody here with a flip phone? Good, I was going to send you out the room because that's close. That's not quite, that's not
the new flip phone, not the new flip phone.
No, I'm talking about anyway. I did say flip phone, you're right. So let's think about how we can use this technology, right? So we're going to walk through a couple of features inside the IG tool that we're going to leverage at BAE. First is about provisioning and deprovisioning, right? Automated fulfillment is the word. As a result of a review or a request, inside of IG, this creates a change request, right? This is an object, it's a record in a table that just says, oh, this needs to change. Either we're taking away something or we're adding something. Those change requests can be handled a number of different ways. They can go out to a ticket system, right? So somebody manually has to go make that change. It's a very fast thing to do. It's not super sexy, but it's very fast. You can do a direct fulfillment with the IG tool. You can reach out to a system and make a change. Like say you can make an LDAP call to AD and change a group membership immediately. That's very, very quick, very efficient. Lastly, if you have a NetIQ IDM investment, if you have drivers that are using roles and resources and entitlements, you can leverage that with IG. So if you already have an investment, you can take advantage of that. They integrate extremely well. After the fulfillment has occurred, it's still tracked inside the system as a fulfillment item. And then in turn, after we subsequently recollect data from those systems, we're going to check off that all these fulfillment items actually made it and the changes happened. This is huge because this is closed loop verification. This is how we prove the change happened. We can report on this, give that report to an auditor and say, hey, here's the evidence. I don't need to create screenshots anymore. Thank you very much, Mr. Auditor. Automated fulfillment is huge. Let's talk about role mining. There's a lot of guidance. Just about every standard out there suggests that you want to use roles to manage access inside your organization, not just for granting access, but also for reviewing access. It just makes things a lot easier and faster if you're not dealing with granular permissions all the time. There's two general strategies for role mining. The first we call top-down. In top-down, you meet with the business and you talk to them about, for the job functions that their application or that the business is trying to complete, what type of access do you think should be in place? And they'll give you some ideas like, oh yeah, they need to access this app and do these things, and this other app and do these other things. So you write that down. Anybody have an idea what the other strategy is? If it's not top-down, it is bottom-up. Bottom-up is super cool. This is where you have connected IG to your applications. You know what access is out there. IG will use some machine learning algorithms to try and show you where groupings of permissions are and who has access to what. So you take the bottom-up approach and you match that up with the top-down, and what you have at the end is a good plan on how you should actually set up roles inside your organization. What if I told you that we could generate a single number for every identity that indicates how risky of a user they are based on their access and permission? That could be extremely useful for a lot of reasons. During review, you have a really quick idea about, hey, maybe this guy, he's super risky, maybe we shouldn't give him domain admin, right? Or during request, maybe I don't want to give this person this access because they're already really risky, they already have lots of other access that is becoming a target. Do you think MGM would have liked that feature? Perhaps. Here's another neat idea is, what if you are completing risk scoring and you have numbers for all your users? You could focus your security group on the risky things, right? They don't have to spend their time on less risky things. Spend your time, be efficient and effective, spend time on the most risky stuff that's going on. So to wrap up, here's some key things that I'd like for you to remember. Number one is the software makes the hard things easier, and it makes the impossible things now possible, right? Compliance is hard, but it is now possible to do a lot of stuff with the IG software. You can save money because now you can achieve some of those hard things. You're going to look good to your leadership by using a tool like IG because you're solving tough enterprise-wide problems. You're going to make it easy for the teams that don't have resources to do compliance work by giving them a tool and a structure. You need to challenge your internal assumptions about how governance works. And then you want to use a tool that your engineering teams won't hate. That's important. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you engage with your partners and your vendors and all your internal teams. Thanks, folks. My name is Jim Montgomery. This is Tracy Lamantia. And you can read a case study about what we just talked about today. There's a link back to the OpenText website. Thank you very much.